Welcome to TCN Talks. The goal of our podcast is to provide concise and relevant information for busy hospice and palliative care leaders and staff. We understand your busy schedules and believe that brevity signals respect. And now, here's our host, Chris Comeaux.
I'm incredibly excited because our guest today is Daniel Pink, the New York Times bestselling author. I'm going to read from his bio. Daniel Pink is the author of 7 best-selling nonfiction books on a range of topics, from human motivation to the science of timing to a graphic novel career guide. His books include the New York Times bestsellers of The Power of Regret, When, and my personal favorite, I have here for those that are actually looking, A Whole New Mind, as well as the #1 New York Times bestsellers Drive to Sell as Human. His deeply researched works have been translated into 46 languages, have sold more than 5 million copies around the world. That's incredible. Over the years, he's also hosted a National Geographic television series, given one of the most popular TED Talks of all time. I just re-listened to it this week. It's awesome, about motivation and incentives. Written a regular column for the Sunday Telegraph and Washington Post. Served as a speechwriter to Vice President Al Gore, and he's been a clue on Jeopardy. I thought that was a pretty intriguing part of your bio. So welcome, Daniel. It's so good to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
So, Daniel, I've started this at the beginning of the podcast, and I left it off and asked our guests, what is your superpower? It's always an interesting question, and adults kind of wrestle with it, but I'd love to hear your answer. What's your superpower?
I think if I have a superpower, I'm not going to do the lawyerly thing and reject your premise that I have a superpower. So I'm going to concede the premise and say that if I have a superpower, it's probably that I'm able to work across disciplines. And I find that is somewhat unusual. So, for instance, like I know a huge amount about sports, and I'm very, very interested in sports. But I also know a fair amount about art and theater and science and and those kinds of things. And so I think my ability to work across disciplines might be my superpower.
That is such a cool superpower. And one of the things I was so astounded that you agreed to be on our podcast. But, hospice and palliative care, I have 30 years now. I don't know if you know that, but that's actually part of the essence of what makes hospice so different is the interdisciplinary team of people, and they rub off on each other. And the term is transdisciplinary, and which sounds like your superpower.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's interesting. And again, I'm as you know, I'm interested in hospice, and I'm interested particularly in the ways that Americans basically during your work time, in the last few decades, have been rethinking their relationship with death, with passing, and the rituals and practices and even the medicine that surrounds that.
That's cool. Well, again, however I can be helpful to you as you do that research. Well, I've been so looking forward to the show. I can't tell you how many people, if I got a dime for every one of your books, A Whole New Mind, that I've recommended. I actually had it on several of our team members' learning plans. I've reread it 3 times. It was
thanks.
It was on my reading list for Christmas over 2024, because I feel like what you lay out in this book is so profound and timely, especially given the fast-moving pace of AI and this application to every aspect of our lives. So first off, maybe to kind of set the table, you share an incredible framework in the book, A Whole New Mind. And I think that framework is probably a great takeaway and also just a framing to our discussion. So can you share that?
Sure. I mean, again, I appreciate the kind words about the book, which is now getting, a little long in the tooth there. I wrote this book, nearly 20 years ago. And the argument there is that the skills that used to get you, the business skills, economic skills, professional skills that used to get you into the middle class, were characterized metaphorically by the left side of the brain: logical, linear, sequential, analytical, spreadsheet, SATs kinds of skills. And my argument is that those skills are still absolutely necessary. You got to have them, but they're not sufficient. And that a different set of skills more characteristic metaphorically of the right brain: artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking, that those are becoming the most important skills in a whole range of work.
Wow. And again, this framework, I actually have a sticky I actually keep on my window of my big screen where I Zoom all day long, and actually keep that framework right in front of me. Interesting, Dan, you may not know, I'm an accountant. So there's another reason why this really spoke to me. It's kind of interesting. I'm not your typical accountant, though. And so,
no, obviously not.
So I think my own journey, I guess I saw in your book, because I kind of feel like Dorothy and Wizard of Oz. I came from KPMG, Fortune 50, and fell into this nonprofit hospice in Pensacola. And they didn't talk about things like financials and data, but they're like this care is just unlike anything else. I go out on visits with nurses and kind of fell in love with it. So I think it's just a lot of interesting corollaries.
I mean, going back to your point about transdisciplinariness, it's that, financials are important and care is important. And those two realms can be compatible. And what we want are people who are bilingual in those two worlds, or who are ambidextrous, and those two worlds should be working together. This book, A Whole New Mind, is not an argument against math, not at all. It's not an argument against financials. It's not an argument against analytic rigor, not at all. It's saying that it's essential. What it's also saying is that the way to be smart today is to be more than that, to have that other side as well. And that other side is becoming much more important. And that other side, sense of art, care is a great example of it. Care, artistic sensibility, big picture thinking, that those kinds of abilities, especially here in America, have been overlooked and undervalued. And now they're becoming much more important.
That is just so on point. Well, that kind of gets me to my second question. And so I love how you talk about the rise of the conceptual age. I think it's a great way to frame this, and just the importance of these right brain qualities, empathy, storytelling. How do you see those things being challenged as we just move more and more? I imagine you probably agree. I mean, the acceleration is going to actually probably get even beyond exponential here as, we get like quantum chips and things like that.
You're exactly right. And again, let's go back to this. Let's go back to this book that you like, and let's be intellectually honest about it. And let me tell you some things that I might have gotten wrong, or that again, I wrote this book before. I wrote this book well before any kind of AI or large language models or anything like that. And
I did not know that. That's incredible.
Oh yeah. This book came out like when George Bush was president, and I was looking at the trends at the tech trends at the moment. That is the idea that software could do a lot of this left brain work faster and better than we could. It looked at the fact that it's easy to outsource some of this routine left brain kind of work. It said that the demand curve for products and services was in a world of incredible abundance was going to shift toward more things infused with like meaning and beauty and so on and so forth. Now, but let's go back to this. So I wrote this book way before large language models, and because those have only been around in consumer use for 2 years now.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that I got wrong was that let me be specific here. I argued that empathy was going to be an important skill in the world of work. And the reason for that is that it was very difficult to outsource or automate empathy. And the example that I gave was that at the time, software could barely recognize a face, let alone understand the emotions in that facial expression. Well, now software can recognize faces really well. And you know what? Software can recognize the emotion in faces really well. And so it is possible to automate some kind of empathy. And what we see also with the large language models, and with some research on this in the last 6 months or so, is that in medical care, large language models actually sometimes demonstrate greater empathy than human physicians. And so this is just echoing your point that the world is moving at this incredibly ferocious pace. And it is hard. It is hard to keep up. And so the way to think about this at the individual level is, what can you do to augment machine intelligence rather than necessarily compete with machine intelligence? In the same way that, I don't want to do long division in my head or on a piece of paper. I'm going to use a calculator for that. So I'm not going to compete with a calculator to do long division, but there's a huge amount of value in that I can provide. It's like, why am I doing long division? Why am I doing this problem in the first place? What kind of analysis do I bring to this thing that requires long division? And so what we need to be thinking about is, what can we do to augment machine intelligence when machine intelligence is getting better and better and better and better and better and better and smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter. And it's happening, as you say, exactly correctly, at almost a blistering, almost unfathomable pace.
I didn't get to share with you before pre-show, but my mentor was a guy named Dr. Lee Thayer. He actually was Stephen Covey's mentor. And I worked with him, I studied under him, et cetera. And that he died at the age of 96 during COVID. But he actually said probably 2 years, so it would have been 2019, somewhere in that ballpark. He actually wrote a blog. We kind of co-wrote it, but it really was his brainchild. And it was "The Robots Are Coming, Oh My." And one of the terms that Dr. Thayer he was really big on virtuosity, which I know you're probably very familiar with that term. It's like the best of the best, especially in the realm of arts, which reminds me of kind of your framework.
Yeah.
And here was the punchline in the blog. You should do your job so well that there's no robot that could replace you because you're doing it at such a level of mastery. And I wonder if that resonates with you when you say augment. Like I just did some incredible stuff the other night, kind of using ChatGPT, going back and confluence kind of two worlds of thought that I've been reading about and feel like, okay, now we've got this really interesting thing we could move forward that I'm not sure two people have put these parts together. Is that kind of what you mean when you say augmentation?
That's part of what I mean. I mean, virtuosity is a better word than augmentation. I'm looking at it in a much, I mean, I think that's better. I think that if we aspire in everything that we do to virtuosity, if you're a professional and you're aspiring to virtuosity in your profession, you're probably going to be fine.
That's awesome. And he said, if you can be replaced by a robot, you really should. In other words,
there's something to be. Here's the thing: there's something to be said for that. There truly is, and we're going to have a reckoning coming because we especially white collar workers said, well, of course that's the case. If a robot can put together a car or some kind of item on an assembly line faster and better and cheaper than a human being, then of course that's what we should be doing. And that has had costs to it in human suffering and in economic dislocation. But now the robots are coming for white collar workers. This is what I was suggesting in A Whole New Mind. It's coming in part for accountants. It's coming in part for lawyers. If you look at You can take a ChatGPT now. I can go into a ChatGPT or a Claude or any of the large language models and say, I need to write a contract to bring on this particular person to do this particular job for me, and just sort of lay out basically what I would do with a lawyer. Say, hey, I need a contract. Here's what I'm doing. Ask me the questions that you need in order to write a contract. And it will ask you the questions, you can respond to it, and it will write you a contract, and it will cut out the lawyer entirely. Yeah. And so this is, so the robots are coming for certain kinds of things. But if a robot, if a large language model can write a contract just as well as a human being, go for it.
Right. I have a really cool example for you. This actually one of my first huge ahas with AI, because we're always trying to push the envelope and being more innovative. And so what I would so I was on the phone with an attorney. I had kind of a place where I wanted to get to, but when I had ChatGPT open, I was asking ChatGPT to download to me the law. So that way I had a framework to ask the question of where I really wanted to get to. So what I normally would probably spend an hour paying the legal fee, I got to within 10 minutes.
You got it. Exactly.
And I had this robust. So that was a perfect example of what I think you're talking about.
Exactly. And if you're a lawyer charging by the hour, and I now need you for 10 minutes rather than 60 minutes, then you just have a 83% drop in your billable hours.
Well, it's interesting. Actually, I had that attorney on a podcast and we were talking in the green room. I think I had shared with her that example. And one of the things she was lamenting was just the transactional stuff. She loves the creative stuff. She's a real unicorn of attorneys. She makes her own jewelry and things like that. And so what I heard her actually say is, and here would be my interpretation, I'm okay with that, Daniel, because now I could get to the stuff that I just love, which is to create with my clients and do something awesome.
Right.
Well, let me kind of segue then. So hospice is, as you can imagine, is so deeply human-centered. So just speak to some of the leaders in that field. How do they embrace automation and AI, but don't lose that relational essence that defines end-of-life care?
I mean, again, I don't want to take something like end-of-life care and reduce it to like a pure problem of economics, but we can. And so we can go back to this idea of comparative advantage. Where do machines have a comparative advantage, and where do humans have a comparative advantage? And I think that machines have a comparative advantage in these very routine types of things. We wouldn't, if you have a monitor to check somebody's heart rate or any of their vitals, that's better than having a human being sitting there with their finger on their pulse counting, right? So we want you want the comparative advantage. And I think the comparative advantage in this and in many things are things like listening, giving people, not only the person who is in the end of life care, but that person's family, listening, trying to help people derive meaning from this moment, giving people, listening to stories, collecting stories, giving people a sense of purpose, allowing them to look back on their lives with a degree of joy and love and transcendence. Those, again, I still think that humans have a comparative advantage in those kinds of things. The other thing where human beings have a comparative advantage is when the machines are wrong. So if you have, a physician who looks at, or a nurse who looks at these vitals that are being taken, and you say, you know what, something is just not right here. I got to investigate. That's a great physician. That's a great nurse. That's the sorts of things that they can do. If, I think that if you have somebody who's listening, who's part of the care team that's listening, and the family is saying one thing and the person in hospice care is saying another thing, and there's a disconnect there, an emotional disconnect, then that's something a human being can pick up on that a machine is unlikely to pick up on. And so, again, you have to think about where is the comparative advantage. And just like your lawyer friend is saying, if the machines can liberate human beings to do these more transcendent things, then I think everybody wins.
Boy, you are so dead on. I have such a cool story to share with you. So we had this hospice experience where the team they felt this barrier with the family, and our music therapist happened to it was almost a passing comment of a child that they lost, and this was nowhere near the narrative. And the music therapist was so attuned and said, "I'm sorry, can you say that again?" And then all of a sudden they realized it was a tragic loss. They hadn't shared this with anyone, all this suppressed anger and hurt, but it unlocked all of this stuff, the husband and the wife, and it ended up being what we would call a beautiful death. So much beautiful reconciliation. And you're so right. It was almost like a passing comment. And they talked about that. The other thing I wonder, I've hypothesized about this. Dr. Thayer was like a modern day Socrates in the Socratic method. I wonder if one of the superpowers of the future is asking questions, because listening, like you're talking about, there's something about presence and listening. And then how to ask a question feels so important that, and maybe we can teach the AI to do that, but there's something about empathy and soul-to-soul connection, and then a tool of asking questions that gives you what I would think would be a competitive advantage compared to an AI.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And we have, I'll give you let me just analogize to a much more mundane example. What we see in some of the research on dating is that one of the most attractive qualities in a prospective romantic partner is asking questions, but a certain kind of question, a follow-up question, right? Not coming in with a list of questions, but actually asking follow-up questions, which suggests that you're actually listening and you actually are curious. And so now here's the thing, AI is decent at asking questions. It really is. And so one of the ways that I use AI sometimes is, I'll give you an example. So I think that we can enlist AI as a question asking partner. Okay. So one of the ways that I use AI right now would be something like, let's say that I read a complicated piece of scientific research or something like that. And I read it and I'm like, okay, I got to make okay, I think I got it, but I want to make sure. I will give the paper to AI and say, test me whether I know the concepts. Ask me a set of open-ended questions and evaluate my answers, how good they are. And what we know from other kinds of research is that that's the best way to deepen learning. And so that's another way that, again, this AI can be a partner, that these software, that this technology can be part of the care team, essentially, for everything that we do in life.
Oh, that's rock solid good. That's like a master class right there. You've also written extensively about motivation and purpose. I love your TED Talk. How can leaders sustain maybe purpose-driven teams when some aspects of their work is data and task driven.
Yeah,
And I see this gravitational pull in spades right now in healthcare, Daniel. Our EMRs suck. I actually sat with a nurse for like an hour. She was showing me this interesting electronic medical record. And after 30 minutes, I looked at her and said, how do you not lose the patient in this? And she sat back and she goes, oh my God, you're right. Because just all the chutes and ladders and the task. Yeah. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I mean, again, we're playing, a similar tune again, and just in a slightly different key. Here's, if you look at medicine, one of the things that we've all had the experience, to say, of going to a physician, and in certain kinds of physicians, they're asking you a set of questions, and they're actually, I remember going to one physician, and she was asking me questions, and she's barely looking at me because she's typing my answers or recording my answers into a laptop. Okay, so again, as a patient, you don't feel like you're getting great care. You might be getting good care because she's asking the right questions and she's logging the answers. But now what you have now is you have AI scribes, where she just turns on the AI transcription system and she asks me the questions, and the AI does that, and she can ask follow-up questions, and she can look me in the eye, and she can understand whether I'm nervous or not nervous, or whether I'm actually getting what she's talking about. And so I think that's a case where having that AI can liberate those more humane aspects of being a physician, whether or being a caregiver at large, whether you're a physician, whether you're a nurse, whether you're someone else who's part of the care team. And so again, one of the things that I have discovered about life in general is that too many people look at the world, their situations, as zero sum. That is, there's a fixed amount, and you're essentially vying with other people to get your slice so that they don't get your slice. And that's true in certain realms, but in most realms, it's positive sum. And so you look for ways to expand the pie. And I do think that AI can, if we treat it right, expand the pie. It can create new opportunities. It can make us better at things. It can open up new kinds of avenues. And in some ways, that is the history of technology and the history of human beings. It's not perfect. There's all kinds of bad things that can happen along the way, but it offers a form of liberation of human capacity.
That's so well said. There's so much research about doctor burnout, and they call it, the Great Resignation, or you're actually resigned, but you're sitting. And a lot of it is because the things that we're kind of poking on, like if you're heads down, document. It's not why you went into healthcare. You went into healthcare because you want to help people.
You go into healthcare because you want to care for people and help them get better. You don't do it to spend 3 hours a day on paperwork, which is what a lot of these physicians are doing.
Oh, it's interesting. My son's he actually was in the Secret Service, but now he's in a different area of law enforcement. And we were talking last night, and he's experiencing something very similar in law enforcement. And he was talking to a friend and almost said exactly what you just said, just in terms of, I didn't come to law enforcement to basically be a paper pusher. I want to help people. I want to solve crimes. I want to actually make the community a better place. And so I think what the picture you're painting gives us a huge possibility for the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you put it as possibility, because it's not an inevitability, because we have choices. We have choices, and we will shape that.
Well, maybe that's a segue to this next question. If you were building a training curriculum for hospice leaders to future-proof their organizations, what skills or mindsets, maybe from your book, A Whole New Mind, would you prioritize, and how would you impregnate our staff with them?
Okay, so for one thing, I would encourage you to hire somebody else for this job, because I'm not qualified for it, particularly particularly on the realm of impregnating people. So I guess what I would do is, I guess sort of how I would approach that problem might be instructive, in that the first thing that I would do is I would ask the people on the front lines that very question. What can we ask everybody who's working there? What can we do to future-proof these organizations? Have a set of conversations with them, because the people who are in those care rooms every day, the people who are talking to patients, the people who are talking to families, they know the answer to this question. All right, and they might be sitting on. So I would go with them. I would also go with sort of being very clear by talking to people. What are our values here? And chances are the values are things like care, love, respect, dignity, and just make sure that those values are exemplified in essentially everything that we do. Essentially every moment that a patient or a family member is there, that every moment, every encounter, every interaction exemplifies those values. Even mundane things of walking into the building, does that exemplify our value of dignity or care? And so that's what I would do. But I think the main thing was that the people who are working there know the answer to this question, so I'd ask them. And save my exorbitant consulting fee.
Well, but I tell you what, this podcast is a blessing to them because I think there's so much wisdom in what you said. I was 25 when I actually had my first hospice job. I came from corporate America, and I didn't know. I thought I knew a lot because I came from the business world, but at least I had enough of a common sense that I just went out and actually shadowed nurses.
Yeah.
And so I'd never lost that lesson. And of course, it's codified in Business America's The Gimbal Walk, Toyota Production System, go see for yourself.
Exactly.
Oh, but man, the wisdom in what you just said.
Exactly. Yeah. Going and seeing for yourself, that's part of it. And the other part of it is asking the questions of the people who are doing the work rather than thinking you know better by viewing it from afar. I mean, you might be able to offer perspective on it because you're not involved in it every day, but the people who are involved in it every day also have something really powerful to add.
That was just very well said. Well, maybe this is a good follow-up then. What advice do you have for leaders who are hesitant or just overwhelmed by the concept of AI? And they're committed to the things you just talked about, human dignity, relationship, empathy is at the core.
I understand why it can feel overwhelming. I mean, I feel overwhelmed. I think that the way to deal with feeling overwhelmed on this or on anything isn't to try to tackle everything at once, but to do one small thing today. If you ask yourself, what am I going to do to contend with the inexorable rise of AI? If that's the question you're asking yourself, then you're going to feel frustrated. But if you say, what's one thing I can do today to learn a little bit more about AI or to use AI to make things in my own realm a little bit better, then I think you'd start making progress. And if you do that every day, you'll make even more progress.
Thank you to our Anatomy of Leadership sponsor, Dragonfly Health. Dragonfly Health is also the title sponsor for Leadership Immersion courses. Dragonfly Health is a leading care-at-home data, technology, and service platform. With a 20-year history, Dragonfly Health uses advanced technology and robust analytics to manage durable medical equipment and pharmaceutical services as part of a single efficient solution for caregivers, patients, and their families. The company serves millions of patients annually across all 50 states. Thank you, Dragonfly Health, for all the great work that you do.
One interesting thing I heard in another podcast recently that to me was a gift, I'm thinking of just the exchange. You and I right now, my mind is popping. I'm taking notes here. Quite often leaders, we get into meetings and we get that exchange.
Yeah.
But yet there's not enough hours in the day. But interestingly, if you engage AI as a thought partner sometimes, especially if you're stuck at writer's block. Absolutely. That's a beautiful way to utilize it.
Absolutely. I use AI a lot for that. So even on very, very mundane things. So I'll give you an example. I was writing something yesterday and I said, I won't go into the full details of it, but I basically had to say, what are the kinds of rules that might be posted at a community baseball park? Okay. Now I can think about that myself. And it's okay, no littering, and it's but I just asked AI that question, and it gives me a list of 47 things that might be listed there, and I'm like, okay, great, now I got it. Okay, so out of these 47, 42 of them they're kind of stupid, but these 5 are pretty good, and I can use 3 of these things and tweak them a little bit, and now I've overcome this block in what I was writing.
That's so good. Well, let me, as I sit here and kind of reflect, and I had no idea that when you actually wrote the book. So if you look ahead 5 to 10 years, you use your superpower, because I do think you're a bit of a futurist. How do you envision AI changing the landscape of things like, compassionate care of hospice? And what role should leaders play in shaping that evolution intentionally? And I chose all those words very intentionally.
Yeah. So I'm not sure because with AI in particular, if you look at something like OpenAI is the fastest adopted consumer technology in the history of humankind.
Wow.
It went from 0 to 100 million users in like a few months. And so if that's the scale of adoption, and if you look at the way that these technologies have advanced, then 5 years is actually not 5 years, it's like 5 decades. And, if you had talked to me or anybody 5 decades ago and said, what is life going to be like in 2025? If you go 1975, all right? Is that 50 years ago?
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah, 50 years. Okay, so 1975 is 50 years ago. If you sat around in 1975, Jimmy Carter is president, right? Disco is ascendant, and said, what is life going to be like in 50 years? Nobody would imagine that you and I would be recording a podcast. That word doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. We're doing it over Zoom or over Riverside, which is a video technology that allows people to communicate in real time. Okay, that seems a little far out. It's all based on this thing called the internet. What? It would, and we're talking about artificial intelligence, which was a term around then, but this idea that you could speak into your smartphone and get an answer to any question. What's a smartphone? It's like, so, there is a certain kind of poverty to our imaginations in the present, and we can't envision how things are going to be going. So, I am consciously, intentionally trying to duck your question because I don't know. Mm-hmm. And also the other thing about it, though, I'll give you two other things about it, is that it's not as if it necessarily is going to happen to us, that we have a role in shaping it. This is why having AI with some kinds of safeguards and some kind of values built in can be helpful. And also, leaders being conscious of explaining to people who, as things are going on, about what they know and what they don't know. 5 years from now, I don't know, have me back on the podcast. We'll see. We'll see. I'm curious to know the answer to that question. Because here's the thing, 5 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about AI. Yep. We wouldn't be talking about ChatGPT. We wouldn't be talking about Claude.
And I think I heard recently in another podcast that right now AI is learning at a rate of 5 years in a 12-hour period. But with the quantum chip, it may be 100 to 200 years in a 5-year period. in a 12-hour period. So 100 to 2, that's just like, that's mind-blowing. It's like the Progressive commercial.
Yeah.
What is it going to, but this, when I think then back why I thought your book was just so brilliant and profound, then the framework gives you something that you can put your energy and imagination into. Then how do I become virtuosic in these areas?
Yeah.
Because then I can shape where it goes. My guess is that's what you were after, is like, I don't know where it's going, but at least let me give people a toolbox and a framework to move it forward.
Exactly.
Well, as this grows, what does it mean to be human is going to become even more and more important. Do you think there's certain maybe values like empathy, presence, intuition that leaders should prioritize, and maybe even, I don't know if protect's the right word. Maybe protect is maybe the right word. Because as you really wrestle with, well, if I was this an amazing attorney, people sought after me all over the world because I knew stuff, and now AI could match me. I imagine as a male, maybe male, female, doesn't matter. I'm going to go, well, what's my purpose in the world? Where's my value? So how do I then protect and prioritize those values and the things that are most important?
I think you make them explicit and you talk about them outright. So, for instance, empathy. If you look at some of the lists that you gave, empathy. I'm less keen on intuition because our intuition is often off. But we can use some of these systems to check our intuitions. I think having that intuition, having a hunch, is great. It can be very helpful. It's a helpful human thing, particularly if that intuition comes in the form of a question rather than a certainty, and you can check it. But empathy, kindness, progress, excellence, virtuosity, those kinds of things aren't going to go out of style.
That's really good. And I also love the way you said, like, I caught that framing of hunch, intuition, because I do think people think, well, my intuition is like certain. but maybe it's just more of a hunch that you need to be a lot more curious about. So then it puts you in this really cool rabbit trail, and you may get new skills, new learning, et cetera, that you could deploy.
Right. I mean, I'm a big fan of like listening to your hunches but also testing your hunches. In the same way, it's essentially scientific thinking. Scientists have hypotheses. But they don't say, oh, I have a hypothesis that this is true, and they don't go forward and move based on that hypothesis. They test the hypothesis. So have a hunch, have a hypothesis, and test it. And I think that way of thinking is going to become extreme. That way of thinking has always been important. The scientific method has been transformative for humanity. And once again, AI offers a kind of rocket booster on that way of thinking.
Boy, that's another key pearl. I hadn't even thought about it from that angle, but that's so right, because then you have this amazing simulation lab sitting at your fingertips. That's well phrased. And also thinking, especially for our healthcare leaders, Daniel, efficiency, just got to get cost out of the system.
Yeah.
That tension between efficiency, maybe empathy or mission and compassion. How do leaders hold space for both as we go into this artificial intelligence age?
I think that's really hard in healthcare in general, because there is a value, and it's in some ways it's an irreconcilable problem, because we're putting the burden of efficiency on individuals when the inefficiencies are coming from huge systemic problems, and that at some level that's irreconcilable. It's unresolvable. I mean, the way that we finance healthcare, the way that we organize healthcare, the way that doctors are compensated based on RVUs rather than on keeping people healthy. I mean, there's so many deep systemic problems that at some point it's simply not fair to say to an individual physician, nurse, hospital administrator, care team leader, you're in charge of making things more efficient. Because you've inherited a system that is woefully inefficient and messed up.
That's so good. And just in that spirit, just know if you can help us. We did a podcast with T.R. Reid. My guess is you may know T.R. He wrote a great.
No, I don't know him, but I read his book about health insurance. Yeah, that was like 15 years ago. Yeah. Yep. And one of my takeaways from that book is the absurdity where, I mean, it's really stuck with me, where he interviews somebody in another country. I don't remember what country it was. And he's like, he's like doing his good reporting. He's like, well, how many people, declare personal bankruptcy because they can't afford their health insurance, their healthcare bills? And they're like, what? What are you talking about?
Yep, exactly. And actually, in a quick moment, he was basically, the idea of Medicare for all. And I looked at him and said, TR, you've used words your whole life. I'm not sure Medicare for all is the right framing and branding. He goes, you know what? You're right. And I said, so how would you brand it? He said, AmeriCare. And I said, that is brilliant.
That's better. I mean, here's the thing. It's like, you want to have a revolution in this country? Take away Medicare for people over 65.
Yep, he talked about that. Yep.
You will have people roaming. You'll have elderly people in tanks going through the streets. Okay, and so what's kind of strange, and we're sort of getting there in a patchwork way, because we have some very positive laws passed under Clinton first and then Obama that provides something close to universal care for kids below a certain age. And so we're sort of, it's all the people in the middle who are getting lost out. And believe me, Medicare is messed up. Medicare is a norm. It can be messed up. Medicare reimbursements for doctors are sometimes not fair. Medicare is an enormous part of our federal budget. But I think it becomes more efficient when we move to a system that has a basic level of coverage for everybody.
Yep.
And then people, can also have a private option if they want to go on top of that.
We're going to send you that podcast and just let you check it out. It really was a fascinating conversation. And then realizing the time that we live, there's another interesting lady named Rita Numeroff who we're going to bring on the podcast. We actually tape that show next week. And so the Venn diagram of both of them, I believe, is the true solution, because I love what you're poking on. It's hard for people to navigate. It's like rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic, because the system is fundamentally flawed.
Absolutely.
And that's why we lose a lot of people in the process of that. Well, let's not lose people here, because we don't want them to kind of throw their hands up. What is one right brain habit, maybe storytelling, reflection, design thinking, that you would say, hey, right now, begin to integrate that more intentionally in your practices, spend some time on it maybe each week, get those tools in your toolbox?
So one very simple thing that I would recommend to people to do is, particularly for leaders, or even people working in the teams, is to have more conversations about why. More conversations about why you're doing something. What you see with leaders and even people working in teams is they have a lot of conversations about how. So if you're a leader, hey, here's how you do that. Here's how you deal with that unpleasant person. And I think having a few more conversations each week about why is a good way to surface a sense of purpose, and actually we have some pretty good evidence that it can actually improve performance across a range of tasks. So that's one thing that I would that's one thing that I would say. The other thing that I would say is that, as you mentioned, music therapists, I actually think that leaders and everybody should expose themselves more to the arts. We have a lot of good evidence that, say, reading novels can help you become more empathetic. We have practices in some medical schools where they're taking young physicians to art museums so they can learn to see more effectively, more compassionately, more universally, in the way that artists see. So I think that exposure to the arts, and again, not in a dutiful way, but in a joyous way, can be really powerful for people.
And I love what you just said too, in a joyous way. I was one of
I don't want people to feel like their kid's being dragged through a museum, because it's supposedly good for them. It should be freely chosen, and it should be done. There is, if you look at people who love the arts, and people who don't love the arts should talk to people who do love the arts and try to understand why that is. And I think that in many cases, certain aspects of the arts have been a little bit sort of elite and off-putting, when in fact what they should be is sources of invitation and joy. And when it's that way, I think people can actually begin to think very differently.
That feels so profound. Years ago, I can't remember the author, but he said that the two things that seem to pierce everything is beauty and affliction. And affliction, grief through death, we're hospice. But the arts is, to me, it's about that beauty. It's like it's transcendent. You can't possess it. There's something about that the transcendent nature of it. And affliction is like, well, death is something that's beyond us. And what do you do with that?
Right. Interesting.
So maybe one final question as we think about what does it really mean to lead? What does leadership look like in this age of machines and artificial intelligence as we go forward?
At some level, it means the same thing that it's always meant, which is, do you have a vision of the future? Are you making that vision clear to the people who you're leading? Are you taking care of the people you're leading? And are you yourself exemplifying the values that you're espousing? I mean, that's been the case for leaders forever, and I think it's going to be the case for leaders forevermore.
I was thinking something you said earlier. I remember whenever Microsoft first started coming out with laptops, and the commercial was like sitting on the beach. Like that was the promise. Although I look over my 30 years, it doesn't quite feel that way. But maybe this is the possibility through artificial intelligence that if we do it correctly, but I do think there's an interesting, the Frost poem, the two roads diverge in the woods. Yeah. Which one shall we take? So maybe that's my way of kind of saying, just what final thoughts do you have? Because it is a really interesting time to be alive.
Yeah. I think I would give the same advice that I would have given 5 years ago and that I'll likely give 5 years from now, which is be curious, ask questions, be a good person. And then at a personal level, don't try to solve every problem. Just try to make progress today.
That is so good. Well, Daniel, you're a treasure. There's so many masterclass pearls in almost everything you've said today. We're going to make sure we pay this one far and wide, and we hope that you do as well. So again, thank you for the work you're doing.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, to our listeners, at the end of each episode, we always share a quote, a visual. The idea is to create a brain bookmark, a thought prodder about our podcast subject, just to further your learning and growth, and thereby hopefully it sticks. We're going for a brain tattoo with this. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, The Anatomy of Leadership. We don't want you to miss an episode. We're going to have a link to Daniel's books, just anything he would like us to share. Also his incredible TED Talk. We're going to include all of that in the show notes. And so it's easy for us to rail against the world and be frustrated by things. Let's be the change we wish to see in the world. And here's our brain bookmark to close today's show.
If machines can liberate human beings to do the more transcendent things, I think everybody wins. By Daniel Pink.